What's up, everybody? Welcome to what is this? This is a YouTube live and it's a podcast.
I think
right?
we're still working that out.
We were just talking about that. This is, my name is Peter Martin. Welcome to Monday's live. This is Adam Maness right here.
Hey.
And we're super excited because we have a very special guest that we're going to be having a conversation with, Mr. Nicholas Payton, very soon. And it's also going to be the podcast for this week. And we're still on a little bit of a high from our conversation with Ron Carter last week, wouldn't you say? But so we had to, I mean, really, there's very little other places you can go past that. But today is going to be,
I know, man. I don't know
in that zone.
When our podcast turned into just like bringing these like A-list heavyweight players on week after week, but let's just keep it rolling.
Yeah. It's just very nerve-wracking, but very fun. What's up, everybody? Why do they sound muffled?
Oh, so many reasons.
This is why we do the banter beforehand. We're on a little bit of a different system here, folks. Your guys' audio quality is AM radio quality right now for some reason. What do you think about that, Adam?
I think you should check your StreamYard audio settings.
Okay, we're gonna do this in real time here. How about that, folks? Can you let us know in the comments if that's a little bit better? I pressed automatically adjust mic volume, Adam. Was that a win-win or a lose-lose?
No, that's a lose-lose.
That's a lose-lose.
Yeah.
Okay. So let us know if we sound AM or maybe even FM today. I mean now, with the changes we just made. Are we still in AM? Yeah, I kind of liked AM back in the day. You know?
Using a cup mute for what?
Using a cup. Oh, that's right. Because we have trumpet royalty on today, we're going to have a bunch of brass players, I'm sure, tuning in for this, which would be fun. Same. Okay. So I'm going to go back there. And if the stereo audio?
Yeah, try it.
Okay. And I took off echo cancellation, but that might...
There's only a few things. No, put the echo cancellation. That definitely needs to be on.
That needs to be on.
For
okay.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. Echo cancellation is on. Same. Still the same. Well, you know what? This is why we call it, what do we call it? Live radio, right?
I mean, this is...
So look, this is...
Every time we try to change one thing. Every single time.
That's right. So look, this is actually a test for us. See, if our video quality is good and the audio quality isn't great, what ends up happening is we have to take our witty banter up to the next level to be able to cut through all this, don't you think?
For sure. And you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and start recording our audio here, and that way we can plug and play. Give me a clap test, please.
Okay.
Bam.
Okay. Should we go off and then come back on? That would mess it up.
So let's just go for it.
All right, so folks, let us know if you would please in the comments. Is this, because it sounds great to us. I mean, I don't want to brag about the situation I'm in right now, but I'm hearing Adam great. I'm hearing myself. If this is is it palatable? That's what's the word I'm looking for? Palatable?
Well, we might just have to change it after the fact. Just go with it live here and then edit it. Put the good audio on it. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Because I don't know if we want to waste everybody's time by doing sound checks at this point. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Okay, so we're going to put that out there. So we're going to record this. Feel free to stay on. This will be back up with premium audio, which this conversation I already know is going to totally deserve. So you can stay on. It's audible, so that's good. But if you want to hear it in premium audio, what do you think about that, Adam? Is that a good...
That's promising a lot, man. Premium anything.
Oh, Nick Payton is going to just leave if he's smart at this point. He just drifts off, you know. For conversation, it's fine. I'm getting mixed signals. It's okay, but needs more mid and upper range.
We have no control over any of that. Got nothing.
Big shout out to StreamYard. Love you guys. So,
shall we
forge ahead?
Okay,
let's do it. Let's do it.
I mean, there's really no other choice at this point. Sorry, y'all, on the live, but we'll make up for it somehow, some way.
There we go. Colleen says, I don't get it. Sounds fine to me. Maybe because I'm a mile high in Denver. Yeah, there you go. Okay, you recording, Adam?
We are rolling.
Okay. Our guest today is Nicholas Payton, a multi-dimensional Grammy Award-winning artist that hails from what I consider to be our most multi-dimensional and fertile artistic city, New Orleans. Nicholas grew up in a musical family. His mother, Maria Payton, was a classical pianist and operatic singer. His father, Walter Payton Jr., a legendary bassist and educator who I had the pleasure of playing with and getting to hang around with some. Nicholas is primarily known as a trumpeter. In fact, one of the leading trumpeters of our or any generation, as well as the heir apparent to the rich lineage of New Orleans trumpet masters, going back to King Oliver and Louis Armstrong. I would say Buddy Bolden as well, but I don't think anyone's actually heard Buddy Bolden play, but by reputation for sure. But I can tell you that trumpet player only scratches the surface in describing Nicholas. I would better characterize Nick as a creator or a creative. Yes, he's an amazing trumpeter, but equally talented and productive as a composer, producer, pianist, bassist, drummer, writer, blogger, but you hadn't heard that term in a while, blogger, and all around leading advocate and voice for our music. He's a fearless, direct, he's highly informed, and in my experience, amazingly spot on when he speaks of anything musical and creative, as well as their intersection with politics. And that has actually remained constant since I first met Nick when he was just 17 years old. Nicholas is the originator of the term BAM, Black American Music, and hashtag BAM, and has penned numerous writings and led many discussions of the problems surrounding the name and associations of the term jazz or jazz. His thoughtful and tireless promotion of BAM has gained steam in many ways over the past 10 years, culminating in being included as one of the New York Times 10 definitive moments, the decade in jazz. I didn't even know the New York Times had such a list. Did you know that, Adam?
I did not know that.
They did. Nicholas has released over 20 albums as a leader, first on the Verve label starting in the mid-90s with some of the finest records of that era. And I know that because I was around during that era, culminating with a personal favorite of mine in 2000, Nick at Night, with the classic Nicholas Payton Quintet, Reuben Rogers, Adonis Rose, Anthony Wanzi, Tim Warfield. Nicholas has remained prolific throughout his career as leader, as a sideman, a producer, eventually developing his own label, Paytone Records, with his latest release, Maestro Rhythm King and Quarantine with Nick, which is a killing album. It's got a scary cover. Don't let it scare you off. Don't sleep on that one.
It also came out like the first week of quarantine.
That's Nick Payton, man. He's always ahead of the curve. Nick has played and recorded with way too many legendary artists to list. I'll throw out a few: Danny Barker, Ellis Marsalis, Clark Terry, Elvin Jones, and Art Blakey. And those he played with and recorded with just before he even turned 20 years old. So that explains why I can't list all the other ones.
Yeah.
Okay. I've also had the pleasure of playing and recording with Nicholas for over 30 years now. Wow. Including, now that I said it, there it is, 30 years. Wow.
Old. Yeah.
And I was able to feature Nicholas on my 2001, my first release on Max Jazz, Something Unexpected, which was
a great record,
a joy and an honor. And a forthcoming recording, maybe from just last year. The last time I was in the studio was actually with Jeff Clapp and Reuben Rogers and Nicholas Payton a couple of days before the pandemic hit hard. We're going to get into all that hopefully, but it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Nicholas Payton. What's up, Nick?
Hey. Yo, what's going on, guys?
How you doing?
Just starting a little fire here. Don't worry about it.
There you go. I think probably after you saw our technical proficiency, you're like, oh, I got to spark it up now.
gotta burn some Palo Santo for you cats.
Well, man, thank you so much for being here and for joining us. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm such an intersection of a friend and a fan. So I don't know what you call that, but that's me. And I've always just looked up to you in terms of you're not only an amazing musician, and I've been on the bandstand with you many times, so I've experienced that and also, heard your bands. But you've developed a whole nother kind of, I don't even want to say sideline career, a parallel track of really the conscious and a commentator, and I would even say critic of this music and the direction that we're going for our generation and beyond. And it's just an amazing thing to see from close up and from far away. So I just wanted to commend you on that. And I was going to ask you first, though, about what's been happening with you over the last 14 months? We saw each other in March. I think it was the second week when we were in the studio and got to play together. And I remember we were like, wait, do we hug or do we shake hands? During that kind of funny period then.
Yeah.
I know you've done a bunch of great live streams and recordings and stuff, but what else has been happening?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, right at the start of the lockdown, I holed up in my crib with Sasha Mazikowski and Cliff Hines, and we made the Quarantine with Nick album. It's funny because we had just done a gig at this place called the what's it called? I'm not remembering the name of the joint, but we had just done a gig days before the lockdown, and we were saying we should really it was like we've done a handful of gigs together, and it was like we should really get together and record, but none of our schedules could align. And then they started announcing that they were going to lock this shit down, and I was like, we're all available now, so let's do it. So we that weekend, Friday the 13th, Saturday, we recorded 2 days at my crib. Cliff, who plays modular synth, but was also our recording engineer. He recorded the project on Ableton, mixed it, sent it to my mastering guy, and it's to date my fastest release from recording to mixing and mastering, 2 weeks out to the public, to what I think might be possibly the world's first COVID-19 record.
Oh, it had to be. I remember when it came out, I was like, what does he know that we didn't know?
Well, and it was super confusing to me because I had seen you, Nick, literally like 9 days before it. So I was like, if he was planning this, he definitely kept it a good secret. He's super relaxed and wasn't talking about any of this stuff. Oh, yeah. So that's amazing. And then, you did a string of just amazing live streams early on. That's actually really, inspired me to try to do some stuff because I was kind of like, oh, I guess we're not going to be touring or playing or anything. And I was like, hey, they made a record. He's doing live concert. But how did that come about? And how much of that have you done? I know you're going to continue doing that. And what was the experience like for you playing for no audience, playing for in an audience, the one that wasn't physically there before? And how did you kind of navigate those waters?
Yeah, for me, art, as an artist, as a being on this planet, I kind of live it, with my heart on my sleeve, So like any type of calamity or destruction, I just put it into the music. To me, that's the whole point of art, is that it's not only serves as a form of catharsis, but it's a healing. And to me, ultimately, it's a way for us to not only have fellowship with one another, but hopefully in terms of the listeners and the supporters out there, I want to try to hopefully inspire and elevate them. And I felt like now more than ever, we really need this music. So as an artist, I feel like this is why I was put here. It's now my responsibility to get off my ass and like really, create, it just really made me want to hunker down and like do it to the hilt, even more so than normal.
That's what's so inspiring about your music. It always has been, but especially now during these times. Every time I check myself against what I see you doing, I'm like, nope, that's not honest enough. It's not. You mentioned the heart on your sleeve. I'm like, I could be more honest with this. I could be more me in my art. It's incredibly inspiring to watch, man, and to hear. For sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was alluding to in the introduction, for you, Nick, is just that I never saw, once you started writing and becoming an essayist and cultural commentator, especially around, the issues of jazz and BAM and the origins of this music and all these different issues, I saw it very much as an extension because we played music together a lot. And I was around you during my formative years, which was weird because you're younger, but you were already I never could figure that out. But it was like, I was like, but you've always been such an honest musician, and people would be like, man, did you hear what Nick said? Did you hear what Nick wrote? I was like, yeah, that's like you've always been that since you were, a teenager. And I always admired that because most people have to grow into that. And it's been exciting to see you growing into it, being more acknowledged and understood and really becoming a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, it's over this last, when did you come up with, was it like 2011, 2012?
2011.
2011. And that was that first blog post, right?
Right. It was interesting because the funny part is I had started writing about it like 2 years prior. So it's just as much of a mystery to me as anyone else why that particular post set off the firestorm that it did. I was actually in Baltimore in my hotel room right before soundcheck. Warren Wolf brought me to Baltimore to do a gig. And I was just tweeting at the time. This is when Twitter was really hot. And I just got these stream of conscious tweets. So I did that. It was about a good 45 minutes, an hour I was doing it. And I was noticing that I was getting like a very strong reaction to these tweets. And I said, I might be onto something here. So I copied and pasted each tweet into a line, into a WordPress document. So a lot of people call the piece a poem or a manifesto, and it was not conceived as a whole. So really every line in that piece is actually a different tweet. And that was what it was, It was a work in real time, like a solo. Basically, it was like an improvisation.
Amazing.
Wow. And then can you just talk a little bit about what you've seen as the evolution over it's crazy now. We talk about now it's a decade. It's 2021, right? So the evolution of the discussion around, the disposal of the term jazz. And I don't know do you see BAM as a replacement per se for the term? I know that you see it as a much more inclusive term than what had been looked at before as jazz, but like, how do you see that evolution over this last 10 years? Have you felt that as a steady thing, or was there kind of like a certain tipping point where it just started to become more accepted?
Good questions. No, BAM is not a replacement term for jazz, because I think a lot of the initial concern among so-called jazz musicians was that, well, how do I make the distinction between what I do from gospel and R&B and hip hop? And my point was, I don't want a distinction, because these are all different root branches on the same tree. I think the problem with jazz is that it separated itself from the whole of Black musics, and more importantly, the popular specter, because so-called jazz is essentially the world's first pop music. But when jazz created this very elitist idea that somehow it was better than the roots from which it came, I think it's actually suffered. And pop music has suffered, because now your current pop artist doesn't have an idea that Louis Armstrong should be as important to them as he is to us, or Billie Holiday. This is the great work of American popular music and song, and we all should be borrowing and listening to one another, because they're all a part of this umbrella of Black American music. And I think one often misunderstood thing is that first, that I'm on a campaign to change people from using the word jazz. I don't really care. I don't want my music referred to that, but I'm not going to tell anyone else what they should call what they do. Is one thing. And the other thing is, the whole point is to establish a family within the whole of these Black musics, not this elitist idea that somehow jazz is more important or more intellectual or so forth. I think those are the things that serve to kill the music, because when people want to go out for a weekend, maybe they can only afford to go out once a month. Well, do we want to go listen to this jazz where it's a stuffy environment? We can't talk. We can't have a good time. We can't dance. We have to have 1,000 records in our collection to be able to understand what they do. No, I want my music to be as sociable and enjoyable as everything else people listen to. And yes, it perhaps has that intellectual headroom if you want to listen to it. But me personally, I don't even mind if folks are talking while I'm playing. And maybe I attribute that to perhaps my upbringing in New Orleans, not only playing outside in second line street band culture, but also like in New Orleans, like you play in clubs and people talk. Music is a part of the social environment. And I think this idea that you have this jazz quiet policy and they make this announcement before the show, it kind of puts a damper on the whole thing to me. I don't like that vibe. I'm happy for people to be talking. It only really bothers me if it's like one couple loud and we're playing a ballad or something. But really a general hum of conversation is cool. What I don't like is when people are staring at me quiet, like I'm in a cage in a museum or some shit.
Yeah.
Like, talk amongst yourselves. Enjoy. Someone's spending $200 to come hear me at the Blue Note with a date, and you mean you can't talk to the person you brought? Like, this costs a lot of money for you, and maybe you might get lucky, and maybe you wind up getting married and having a child, all spurred on by my music. Isn't that the point? Like, I feel flattered if my music contributed to the life force of this life. Also, like, when we listen to the great records, let's take someone who was considered almost a cocktail musician, the great Ahmad Jamal. Very polite, quiet music as he was categorized. If you listen to Live at the Persian, there are people talking all through that thing. It's not a quiet room at all. So when did we get so precious where people can't talk amongst themselves? Doesn't mean they're not listening.
Right. I mean, but this is kind of a revolutionary thing, I think, an angle and kind of, lens that you're describing here, because isn't it part of like what became sort of the advanced and elevated jazz aesthetic was about? We have a listening policy. This is a quiet room. You have to do your homework. This is music to be put into a museum. And so we are going to charge $200. And it's, this is better than other music because you can tap your foot to it maybe, but you better keep that in your shoes. It better not come out, above it. And it feels like, we can certainly blame promoters and, the whole infrastructure of the music that started to do this. But I also feel like a lot of musicians, we were kind of to blame because we bought into that. And I think that might be why there's been a lot of pushback against this, because it feels great to be like, oh yeah, we're elevated. Now we're at the level where we're like classical music. We're going to be in the great halls of Europe and people are going to bow down to us and we're going to be at this other kind of a level,
And look what's happening with classical music. They're trying to get more in on what we're doing and other popular music because the audience is dwindling, because the shit is dated. Like no one wants to sit still in their seats and feel like they have to be quiet. Music and listening to music should be an active engagement if you choose to. Right.
I think too, you hit on something. I really wanted to talk about this because you have such a great concept on this, and people are so interested in that, and that is just what New Orleans is culturally with music. And you kind of hit on it, that it's something that is experienced in a way that's really different than just about anywhere I've ever been. And I was fortunate enough to kind of have my formative years in New Orleans, and so it became normal to me, and it was such a gift that I got. But I think that when you describe this kind of, cultural aesthetic that exists there, that definitely transcends any kind of like labels of music, of different kinds of music, and what that Black American music experience that came forth, that is certainly exemplified all around the world, but probably in New Orleans more so than anywhere, where you can see not only the threads of it, but it's still existing. And like But can you just talk?
Palpable.
Yeah.
Because it's like the only city in the world where you can have a band assemble that lives in a neighborhood. They take it to the streets. People come out of their houses, and everyone from the 2-year-old to the 102-year-old knows what body movements corresponds with certain rhythms and so forth. So the music is actually a part of the social fabric of the city in a way that it's not something looked at as entertainment or something we do on the weekends or only at the club and party. It's a part of the everyday fabric of how the city moves. And I think that relationship to me is something that I've carried, and I'm sure for you as well, Peter, to our every experience that we have, even when we're in a Carnegie Hall or at a North Sea Jazz Festival or whatever the venue is. And I think that's what makes New Orleans musicians in particular such a hot commodity amongst the world, because they never lose that sensibility of community and how music touches people, which is the point of us playing music for people, is that we reach them, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Oops, there we go. Nick, I got so many questions and I want to ask you.
Let's go, man.
So one is, can you talk a little bit just about the 90s and like what was the jazz aesthetic there? Like, and, you know, we've talked about this.
Well, I feel pictures are coming on.
No, I'm not gonna. Well, I might pull out.
I got some pictures, man. I got a bunch of pictures of that Jazz Futures 2 tour we did, bro.
Oh man, I got to see that. I don't really have any of those from that.
Yeah, I got a bunch of pictures from that tour.
So yeah, man, I'd love to hear your memories of that. So what Nick has just referred to, we were in Jazz Futures 2.
Peter, what was your Oak Tree budget like back then?
Oh man, my Oak Tree budget was good, and so was the whole band, man. But yeah, we were in 2, not to be confused with 1. But that was another. I mean, I think about, like, we had such a fun time on that tour and playing. But I mean, you talk about formative years. But it was Nicholas Payton on trumpet, of course. Herb Harris, I haven't heard that name in a minute, on tenor. Ronald Westray trombone. Chris Thomas on bass. And Brian Blade on drums. But I think that, like, the whole, you know, sort of 90s jazz vibe, like, where do you think that sort of places, like, where is that going to end up being placed historically? And, like, what is the impact on young musicians today? And I'm thinking about, you know, for sure, like Josh Redman's group and your classic groups, some others that I can't, you know, I mean, just everybody. Where do you see that from a kind of historical perspective now?
The feeling I get from my students and the younger cats is that they view that as a sort of like a heyday, which, you know, in retrospect that I look at it, it was the last hurrah. It was the milk and honey years before the door kind of closed on that idea. That was when there was, you know, big budgets. You know, my first album, you know, my first 5-album deal with Verve, you know, I got 100,000 on signing. Like, that's just unheard of in today's culture. Now we've transitioned to, I see people doing Kickstarters to even be on a major label, which the paradigm has completely shifted, where like record companies would give you tour support, or if you had to go out to WBGO while you were doing a week at the Vanguard, the record company would pick up the band in a stretch limousine, take you guys out there in a day, bring you back. They would buy tickets and seats at the club if you were a beginning artist to make sure that you did well, so that the numbers looked good, so the next time you establish this reputation of selling tickets and being
there to hear us play. Wait, you burst my bubble, man. I thought all those people were there for us.
No, but back then too, the record company people came, like all the staff came at least once. It was just a part of the process. It wasn't expected. No, I would say that it was expected if you had a gig at a label that you loved the music. So it was your responsibility when your artist came to town that you would at least once go down to the club. And what that does is it fosters an environment of when people are invested in your music, they have more interest to see that it does well. So when the people at your record company have actually broken bread with you and gone to dinners with you and gone out to that trip to BGO with you and come down to the club several times that week, and they know all the band members, they're really working on behalf of people they considered family. So the vibration at that time at Verve just very much felt like a family. And I remember us being at a Verve party once, and it was the first time I met Abby Lincoln, and she was just this beautiful being, and she came up to me. She was like, "Yeah, Nicholas, this is just so great, this energy." And here's someone who has been in the business maybe 30, 40 years at this point. She was like, "I've never been a part of this kind of family before." And that was just the vibe in the situation. There was a lot of camaraderie. You know, when my band would play the Vanguard, you would have Lou Donaldson in there, Betty Carter in there, James Williams in there, Steve Touré's in there. He said, and I actually posted a recording that we did of one of the nights I played in the Vanguard right before we did Peyton's Place. And there were just so many luminaries there just to check the music out. No one paid them to be there. It wasn't because it was the it spot per se, but because everyone was just invested in the music. And I think the overall carry out from the 90s I get is that there was more camaraderie, more people going to each other's gigs, checking everybody else out. It wasn't as cliquish as it seems now. And so, you know, this is going over here, this is going over there. Everybody was still kind of like a community. And there are two things that I often attribute to the big change in New York, to things kind of being like more like where they are now, which is Art Blakey passing away. That was a big blow. And the closing of Bradley's.
Yeah.
And Bradley's, I feel like no other club has picked up that slack, because I kind of feel like there's no other club in New York since where everybody necessarily feels comfortable. Whereas at Bradley's, you'd have Roy Hargrove in there, Jackie Terrison in there, Mulgrew Miller, Betty Carter.
You lose him?
No. Yeah, a call came in, and sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah. Okay, call came in and wiped the screen. But yeah, Betty Carter would be in there, Cecil Taylor would be in there. All generations of musicians. Elvin Jones would go there and hang out for days.
Yep.
Everybody was there.
What was it about Art Blakey that with his passing?
Well, he had established this lineage of artists who he was mentoring from the 50s on through to his passing. So it was a real institution. It was a real training ground. And even like Horace Silver, another one, who actually started the Messengers, and that was his band, and he basically gave it to Art.
Yeah.
But you had these lineages established, and that was the time where it was the masters who decided who the next cat was. And somewhere in the 90s or towards the end, then you started seeing the magazines or the Grammys or these different ancillary institutions deciding who the next cat was. It wasn't press-based then. It was strictly this cat played with an Elvin Jones, or played in this band, or played with Abbey Lincoln, or came through Betty Carter School. This is how we know Greg Hutchinson is the next drummer to watch out for, because he played with Betty, he played with Ray Brown. This is the next cat. We kind of lost a little bit of that. So I would say that's one of the singular differences between then and now. Can I curse on here, or how? What's this?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. I'm not trying to shit on the younger generations, because in many respects they have to do what they have to do, and the opportunities for them to learn aren't as fruitful for them as they were for us coming up in the generations that we did in the 90s. But I do think that there needs to be more of a motive on their part to study, if at all possible, under tutelage, under masters. And maybe that looks different now, because you have people like Carl Allen, or like the late great Ralph Peterson, teaching at institutions like Berkeley and Juilliard, respectively, and so forth. So maybe that's the new training ground, so to speak. But yeah, to me, it's crucial as a young musician to really learn how to play, and you want to be a master artist and musician, you have to be around and study and play with master artists, musicians, your predecessors. There's no way around that. There's no course or amount of records that is going to be able to supplement or be a substitute for that master to student passing down of the torch, if you will. Because when we talk about Black American music, that's actually the point, because in its essence, it's African. So we all are indebted to a more African aesthetic of the passing down of information, as opposed to maybe a more Eurocentric mindset of studying and reading books and so forth. And that's not to say that's one is better than the other. They're just different. And in the African tradition, it's more folkloric. It's more about the griot tradition of the elders sharing stories to the young ones coming up. You know, I can say for a fact that, you know, my years with Roy Haynes, He didn't talk about music or how he wanted his music played, but just from one crack on the snare drum, I felt like he calibrated my time. I felt like my feel from the 2 years before I worked with Roy Haynes, after, I can credit him with completely changing my swing quotient.
Wow.
You know, and that's just something you can't get from a record. That's something you can't get in a classroom, I don't think.
Right.
So,
I think it's one of the great things about the BAM movement, about Black American music, is amongst all the other things that framework shift of calling the music this, is that it teaches you how to learn the music. Like, it's all there. It's all there in the culture. It's just for you to understand that and recognize that. It's, you know, because our business around here is teaching people how to play music better. And so to say, like, it's there in those masters of Black American music, you just have to go seek that out. That's the way. That's the only way, you know.
I'm just wondering too, Nick, it's I'm wondering if part of the thing that was maybe I don't want to say lost forever, because I feel like there can be some reconnections and everybody's recalibrating now, obviously, anyway, as we come out of, you know, whatever this pause period we were in. But when you were talking about Verve and that being kind of a very special time, Abby Lincoln, Betty Carter, Shirley Horn, Joe Henderson, you had the older musicians who actually weren't that old. We're almost as old as they were at that time, you know. But we were like the masters, like, and it wasn't even like, oh, do you think, you know, Abby's better than, I mean, no, they were all their own people, but none of us questioned, because we understood like how we graded people. They could play, they could sing. Like there was a common, you know, understanding that nobody ever argued about with them. But then the record labels had a huge amount of power compared to now, which is like none, because they're not really around. But they were like, Verve at least was in sync with that, in the same way Blue Note has been at different times or whatever. But then Verve also had, you know, yourself and Roy Hargrove and Mark Whitfield and, you know, this great group of younger musicians kind of in the making. And there was almost like this tacit approval from the masters to the young players, and you guys were all together. Maybe that's kind of what Abby was alluding to, you know, that story with, you know, and they would argue, you know, we know all the great stories about Betty versus Abby or whatever, but it was all about like, no, we have to go to this next level. And, you know, Cecil Taylor and Betty and, you know, going back and forth at the Vanguard and at Bradley's. I mean, that stuff is priceless. And I do wonder, like, what do you see as the clearest path to us not trying to duplicate that time, because you can never, you know, make it happen again, but to get back to that kind of camaraderie, that kind of fellowship within the music among the generations, all the things that this music has always exemplified so well. Like, because people be like, how can you have different age? I'm like, that's just the way we do it. I mean, like, it's always been like that, and it's always come so natural. So like, how do we get back to that? That's an easy question.
I think it's as simple as starting by going out to one another's gigs and being present. You know, because I know for me at that time, when I knew Betty was in the back, and, you know, whomever, Javon Jackson or the Cats, man, you really want to play because you know they're listening. So I try to do more of that now, and I've been doing a lot of that recently. Now that stuff has been opening up, I've been going back on Frenchman a bit and hanging a bit and sitting in. And even if I don't sit in necessarily, just your presence, I think, is affirming to the current and younger generations. And the younger cats should also go to the older cats' gig to learn and to be in that space. And even just from a networking perspective, not to say that you should go with hopes of trying to land a gig, but all too often I get calls or emails or texts from young cats like, hey, I want to play with you. I want to play with you. But when I'm in your city, I never see you there.
Right.
So if you love my music and you want the gig that bad, you should be there every time you possibly can when I roll through your city. At least that way I know that I see your face, so I recognize you. There's an established relationship, and I know you know my music. You know, it can't just be a business deal, like you're gonna text your way into my band. It doesn't work like that. It's just a little contrived and forced. You know, it should be a very natural relationship. Like, I know you're a pianist. I see you every time I come to your city. You show up, maybe sometimes you sit in. So I know this cat already has vibe and a feel for what it is that I do. So when my regular pianist can't make it, you'll be the next option I think of, or you might get the gig next. It should be more organic. So I think, I think it starts at just us showing up and being present at gigs. And that's something that the late, great Roy Hargrove was just real great at. And it's something I admired about him. And I was inspired, and I started hanging out a bit. We got really close because I hadn't seen him for like a good 10 years, maybe.
Wow.
And then the last 2 years of his life, we hung out quite a bit, and we were running into each other at Smalls or the Zinc Bar and so forth. And I really admired, he was there every night. After gigs. If he was on tour, when he'd come back, he'd go straight downtown and go to the clubs. And he would bitch to me about it. I don't know how much the younger cats knew. He would talk about they can't play, they're afraid to swing. Like, he would have all these things, but it never stopped him. It never stopped him from going, because he realized the importance and the value of that. And now that he's not doing that anymore, those of us who are here, his brothers, we need to and sisters, we need to pick up the slack. Someone has to be in the trenches, reaching down and pulling the youth up, as our elders did for us, because they didn't have to give us the opportunities they did. I certainly feel like there were better trumpet players Elvin maybe could have called, but he decided to give this young cat from New Orleans a shot, and we kind of have to pick up that slack.
Oh man, this is such important words and what you're saying. I love this, and I think that, you know, it's easy for us in our generation to be, you know, like, they need to come out and show up, and they do. But thinking about what you just said, I realized, like, when we were coming up, there was no texting Betty Carter or Blakey, because that's just what it is. So we did have an advantage in that we didn't have these options. I think a lot of, you know, with social media, with all the great things as far as you can connect with somebody, you know, if there's a young trumpet player in California that's just coming up now, like, they could actually connect with you, maybe even get a lesson or you know, something, get some feedback, maybe even, especially, you know, when everyone's locking down. But I mean, there wouldn't be any connection back when we were coming up, except for when the cats would come through town or whatever. But maybe it makes it harder for the younger players to realize what you just mentioned, that personal connection, that being on the gig, being present physically in the community, because you feel like you can get everything. It's like, well, I know Nick's whole thing. I've got his transcriptions. I've seen him on YouTube. I've seen him do workshops, and so I'm good. You know, and then a lot of musicians are shy anyway, so they kind of take that. But I love this idea of, like, going out there, and I think for sure Roy was just a leader. I mean, he it's funny you say, you know, like, when you come back to New York, he's doing the same thing on the road too. That was like a 24. That was like 365 for him. He'd be like, we would do gigs, and, you know, and Roy would be getting tired at the end of the gig. We're like, but you're not going to hang out tonight. And then, you know, it's like, come on, let's go to the session. Like, what? How do you know when there's a session in this little French town, man? But I think you've done a great job of really connecting, and it feels in a strange way. I always looked at you and Roy for our generation. This just shows how fortunate I've been. You're the two trumpet players that I played with the most from, like, the age, you know, 20 through now. And now I'm just throwing names around. See? But I always felt like you guys, you know, because you were great trumpet players, but composers and, like, really leaders of this music, you know, through this different time. And I remember talking to you back in the day, Nick. I'd be like, Roy said this, and then I realized, I was like, wait, they haven't really hung out. And I remember talking to Roy about you, and he's like, yeah, what's up with that? Like, I was like, yeah, you guys never really hung out until you got on Verve and stuff and started doing some things together. And you probably were hearing about each other as, like, there's this cat there.
From way back, through Winton, actually. Like, when I was 12, 13, he would be like, man, there's this cat, Roy Hargrove in Dallas. And when I got to know Roy later, he was like, yeah, Winton would tell me about you when I was a teenager still in school. So we, like, heard about each other for years before we actually met, you know. Right.
But I mean, I feel like you've, you know, kind of taken the baton since Roy's, you know, premature and, you know, passing in a lot of ways, in a really, you know, profound and thoughtful way that goes way beyond trumpet players and a fraternity there, which of course is there. But I think that this idea that, you know, you're talking about now is going to be so important. I know last year, or I guess it was the year before, when I did the Betty Carter Jazz Ahead program at the Kennedy Center, and had all these great young players together, you know, that they do, which is really coming out of, you know, Betty's whole vision I mean, she started that whole thing. I remember talking with the young students, and they hit on some of these same things that you're talking about from the 90s. They're like, man, we want to get out and play. And I'm looking at them. I'm like, man, you guys, it's so hip for you. Like, we were waiting around for record deals, and only a few of them. It's not like we all had record deals. I never had a big record deal. But I'm like, now you guys can go make things happen. And they were kind of like, well, we don't want to go. We don't want to be on social media. We want to have what you guys had at that time. And that was a real eye opener for me, because I was like, wow, you actually can have it. But they do need us to kind of show them that, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. The thing is, it's about, I think, bridging that gap. They also have a lot of advantages that we don't. For instance, the idea that you can do a record at your house now that's studio grade quality and release it to people without the middleman of the record company, without having to have tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, a home studio back in the 90s was something was a luxury only afforded to the rich.
Yeah.
Now anybody can have a home studio for very little money and make a quality product. And you can distribute it through social media and go viral and really not need the labels, and have all the money and own your masters. So that's something we couldn't do, like owning your masters back then and still having a viable career and being able to connect. Yeah. That's something that we had to go through the systems in place. So, there's a give and take there as far as like, well, what's better or what's worse. I think that the idea is that, as you said, like, if we guide them and really show them and give them the tools for which we've learned, but it's up to them to carry the next step, the next step further. We pass it down to them and they take it a little further, as we did for those who preceded us.
Absolutely. So how do you see, coming out of this pause/lockdown pandemic period, how do you see these issues? I mean, obviously I don't know about obviously, but it feels like there's an openness to, audiences and musicians to really realigning and possibly even really understand and look at through a different lens, the idea of BAM and Black American music and like where this music can go. But how do you see that actually happening, like with venues and clubs? Because everyone's talking about this. It's like, I mean, there's the whole issue of like, are people going to want to go into the Vanguard where there's no windows and there's bad ventilation and there was already disease being spread before COVID probably, But I mean, even beyond that, like, where do you see things going? Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about the scene in the coming years?
I am. Well, one thing I would say with specific regard to BAM is I've seen a tide changing really over the whole 10 years, but almost accelerated in this COVID era. I think that last summer with that sequence of murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, that really gave the nation a pause, that we really have a lot of work to do in terms of race relations in this country. And with each successive thing like this, and it's such an unfortunate price and a sacrifice that lives have to be lost. Black lives have to be lost for America to develop a consciousness about themselves. Like at a certain point, it's just a price too high to pay. But if anything can be brought about as a result of it, is that we become more serious, and that the need to change becomes hopefully more dire. And I don't feel it's happened yet. It hasn't gotten dire enough. We're still having these same conversations. But what I noticed with BAM, now when I started BAM in 2011, we're like in the height of the Obama years. So most folks, black folks included, thought we were already in the promised land. We have a black president. We never thought we would see one. We're good, right?
Right.
There was even this mode of thought called post-blackness, like that we're beyond it now. We're just beings on this planet. And then when we saw the amount, Black Lives Matter started under Obama. That's something all too often forgotten. It's not a Trumpian phenomenon. Like it started while we had a Black president. And we saw that he was very crippled in some senses of not being able to actually do anything about it. When I was talking about these things, it was just a very uncomfortable situation and a conversation. Now I've seen where I'm not even talking about it so much, and everyone else is talking about race all the time. I've seen institutions of higher learning now wanting to change their jazz departments to Black American music departments. Tulane University has already voted, and they'll be starting their first Black American music track this coming fall. Wow. There's also talk at New England Conservatory of them doing the same thing. So now at that level, now we're talking about the institutions of America, education, which is the primary foundation of thought in this country, that they're beginning to embrace and accept BAM for what it is, for what I was saying 10 years ago. But it takes time. And not unlike the music itself. You know, I think about someone like Thelonious Monk, who I think he wrote something like 52 tunes or something like that. A lot of the tunes that were on those records that achieved more popular fame, he had recorded 10 years ago already. People had just gotten hip to his music. So he had the fortitude to soldier for his vision. He didn't write more new tunes. He just said, I'm gonna keep playing these songs until people actually hear them. And it's become a very important part of the fabric of the sound of American music. So that's the BAM part of where I see all of this. In terms of the music itself and its viability, me hanging on Frenchman Street, I'm noticing a younger crowd. It's almost like we're at the brink of another roaring 20s, which was very similar to coming out of the Spanish flu and people being cooped up. And then when they transited that and people started going out, and here's Louis Armstrong. We are at the precipice of that moment again, right now, that I'm noticing. The crowds, I've been hanging out at this spot, which is like one of my favorite. I'll go ahead and say it's my favorite spot right now to hang out, called the Royal Frenchman. And it's a hotel, but they have a courtyard outside. So there's different types of venue in the same space. Outside courtyard, and then you have a lobby area, which is kind of sleek and hip with a bar, and then there's a bar next to that. It's a younger demographic. They're into the music, they're excited. They've been cooped up in their houses for the last year and a half, and they're happy to see people in music. And I hear people like hollering at the music in the appropriate places, like when you listen to Charlie Parker albums from the 40s. And these are kids who don't necessarily know jazz music. Wait, I lost you guys on the screen. Something happened. Wait. Are you all still there? Okay, there you go.
Sorry, we lost you for a second.
Cool. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. We lost your Charlie Parker record in the 40s.
Okay, cool.
Up there, please.
But I'm hearing people hollering in the appropriate places in the music, like a Charlie Parker album in the 40s. And what I'm seeing now is we have an opportunity to develop younger, newer generations. Nothing against older folks. We got y'all though. I'm not being an ageist, so I don't want to say that we want to abandon our older audiences, but we need to develop younger ones if this music is to continue to live. And the demographic for the music can't be younger than the audience itself. Right. So that's what I'm seeing. So I would actually encourage everyone in their respective cities and their locales to develop this kind of scene for the music again, because people are hungry for it. They've been cooped up in their houses. They're ready to get out safely, of course. And if you can connect with them in this moment, you will establish a relationship that will carry them throughout the rest of their lives. Yeah. So I think it's really up to us how we want to steer this ship. It's a golden opportunity. We can look at it on the negative side, but I choose to look at it on a positive side. Yeah, we've been out of work and it's been a depressed kind of state, but out of these things can come great reward. You know, as they say, no mud, no lotus. You know, what are we going to take this opportunity? We want to make take these lemons and make lemonade. That's how I choose to look at it. And we are at the brink, from what I'm seeing happening at the Royal Frenchman, we're at the brink of another Roaring 20s and making this music a viable part of the fabric of society once again.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So I wrote down Royal Frenchman because that's apparently developed since I was there 14 months ago. So I'm gonna be there. You got to take me there when I come back.
Yeah, let's hang, man.
But now I'm assuming, because I know this is coming from you, that's not the, hopefully the trend that I had seen over the past few years in New Orleans, not always just on Frenchman Street, but definitely as it's exploded. Because I remember, as you do, when Frenchman was like dead. I mean, it was like Snug Harbor and Cafe Brazil and
that was it.
Istanbul, kind of, if they were open.
That was it.
But then there's the whole like Tulane, not just Tulane, kind of out of town university student trying to play brass band music on the corner, which I was starting to see take off. Like how do we avoid?
Yeah, well, it's a mixed bag. Yeah, it's at risk of gentrification, if not been completely gentrified already. Like I remember when the Pauline Connection was thriving right on that corner.
Right.
Now it's a Willie Mays Chicken Shack, which people think is some old New Orleans institution, but it's not. It's a fairly new construct. No disrespect to Willie Mays, but it's not an old New Orleans institution. And Frenchman has kind of become a Bourbon Street annex. So it's become very commodified in a way of, when you're talking about when it was just Snug and Brazil and Istanbul, it was a true artist hang.
Right.
And people who were there were really there for the music. Now it's kind of like, everyone is like, no, Bourbon Street is not hip. When you're really hip, you go down to Frenchman. But if everybody knows it's not hip, right? So it's not underground. Yeah. It's not as underground as people want to believe it is. It's just an alternative to Bourbon Street. However, we can take this as an opportunity, because those people don't know what they're coming to see. So if you can provide them with, even though they may come for bullshit, if you put real music there in that space, they can't help but be affected by that. And to me, again, it's about the artist taking that bull by the horns and taking control of that situation and making the most out of it. You can shit on it and say Frenchman ain't shit and it's a bunch of tourists and a bunch of, gentrifiers and hippies and hipsters no, but then use it as a teachable moment. This is a potential to develop a new audience.
Right.
And that's how I choose to look at it.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. And New Orleans is a place, I mean, anywhere could be, but New Orleans lends itself because you've got that tradition of cultural joy and awareness that's ingrained, at least in the people that have been there. And it's so pervasive that it does spread to other people from Iowa or Missouri or whatever, if they don't realize it. And that's part of the allure and the joy. Yeah. If you just give them the corny strip clubs on Bourbon Street, they're like, wow, this is great. I love doing New Orleans, and then it's like an SNL sketch. But I love the way that you're describing it and the hope of that. Since we're talking about the old days on Frenchman Street, I want to give you a quick little rapid fire.
Oh, here we go.
See, I want to see. I'm going to throw some stuff out from the past and see what Nick remembers. Because I have the feeling he remembers. I already know because he's talking about the jazz futures stuff that I don't remember. But I want to see if you remember this. Moon Over Miami. You remember the show?
Vaguely, yes. Wynton was doing the score for that, right?
Delphio,
yes.
Delphio, right. Okay, so do you remember the time, and remember the studio we used to record out at the guy's house in New Orleans East?
Yeah. Amos and Andy Studios.
Amos and Andy. Didn't we rename it Amos and Andy?
It was so disrespectful. That was Daryl. Daryl, who's now the sound engineer at the Marcellus Center, actually. Okay. Yeah, it was so disrespectful. He called those cats Amos and Andy.
You were young and dumb, I know.
Yeah.
And he was like older than us. He was probably like, man, I should.
Yeah.
Didn't we say it like? Didn't we just start calling it?
Yeah. It was Amos and Andy Studios, bro. So disrespectful.
He'll like have his assistant send out like printed things with that written like or something. Yeah, I'm on to Delphio's fault. But okay, do you remember when? Okay, so just to frame this for everyone, this is back. Network television still was like a thing, and they had a show, short-lived, not because of the way of what we did with the well, maybe because of what. But
jazz, man, that jazz, bro.
Exactly. So, but I mean, this is like a legit ABC. Like it had a pilot. Remember we did the pilot and everything, the music for it. And this is back in the days when like nothing was done outside of LA because you had like big reels and stuff that had to be sent, but they would send them by Delta, like on the plane, because they had to get it to New Orleans, and then Delta would write the music, and he'd have us all in Amos and Andrew's studio, and we would just record all this stuff. But then like a bunch of episodes kind of went by, and then I think that's when Delphio got the gig with Elvin Jones actually. Well, he got some gig because I remember, and then it looked like the show was going to get canceled anyway, so he kind of abandoned it. And you and I were out at A&A. Let's just call it A&A Studios. I feel bad. But we were out there, and Delphio kind of like just left us notes. It's like, do whatever you can, bro.
And he just left you the gig?
Yeah, he just left us like we're out there, and we've got like the videotapes of the thing, and it was like little like notes on what to do. But I remember like I played some piano or keys, whatever. I don't even know if they had a piano, some kind of keys or something. But Nicholas, you played every other part. Like we both kind of wrote some stuff because they were like, we want some Miles Davis-y, whatever. And so we're watching like on the screen as the things go by, like kind of just improvising. And Nick is like at the drums, and then he's like overdubbing the bass, and then he's like trumpet and stuff. But Nicholas played every single instrument except for the piano on that. And we in like a matter of like 3 hours knocked out that whole 60-minute episode.
Damn, I forgot all about that. So you got me on that one.
Okay, good. Well, I'd love to hear it and see, because as I recall, with some hips. I remember.
What was it called? What was the name of the show?
It was called Moon Over Miami, and it was like,
you had a dish at Denny's.
I mean, it was like an ABC. I think it was ABC. It was like a real show. It just didn't last very long. Okay, let me see if I had some others. Jazz Futures we talked about. Snug Harbor we talked about. Oh man, that's all I can remember. So there you go.
That's great podcasting right there,
hey,
man.
Pete, you remember Time Machine?
Yes, Time Machine.
Oh, Time Machine, bro. That's a group that a lot of people don't know. It's my group. Started it around, I guess, end of '98, which was actually the precursor to my Sonic Trance project.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever told you this, but I actually tried to get us to do an album on Verve. Wow. And I gave Richard Seidel, the Anarch, I had taped one of our gigs, and he was just kind of like, nah, it's too electric. You can't do that. Yeah. And that's really how Nick at Night came about, which is why I had the harpsichord and the celeste, because they wouldn't let me go full on electronic. So I tried to think of acoustic instruments. So the celeste to me was kind of like a Rhodes, and the harpsichord was a little bit like a clav. Right. But yeah, that band was very, for me, very pivotal to my transition into playing more funk oriented electronic music.
Yeah, it was a great band, and some of my best musical memories. So just to frame it, Kent Jordan. You remember Kent Jordan? Kent Jordan, Steve Mazikowski. Mm-hmm. But remember the original guitarist, the very first rehearsal. See, I'm gonna stump you on this, I think. The very first rehearsal, I think, was at my crib on DeSoto.
I remember that.
Around. And I don't know if Steve couldn't make it, but it was Mark Whitfield.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah. Because the guy who kind of inspired me to do it was, I saw a gig with Mark, and you were on Rhodes. I forget who else was in the band. But y'all were playing like some George Benson stuff. And there was a percussionist. I forget who was on percussion. But
wait, Mark Whitfield was playing some George Benson stuff? What?
But yeah, but seeing y'all do that gig at Snug, I was like, man, I want to do something like that. So that's probably why Mark was at that rehearsal.
Okay. Chris Severin on bass.
Chris Severin.
Let's see if I can remember the whole band. Adonis Rose on drums. Was that it? Oh no.
Daniel Andrews made the first gig or so on percussion, and then I eventually got Kenyatta Simon. Right? That's right. Yeah. And then there's one later. And then later, Bryce replaced Kent.
That's right. Bryce.
And then later, I added Philip Manuel to sing.
Dang, that's the one I was hoping you were going to
Yeah.
Phil Manuel on vocals. Yeah.
Phil. Yeah.
That was a great band, man. We played at Jazz Fest one year. I remember had a really, really fun set. And Snug Harbor. And didn't we play at what was the other now I'm gonna get into some bad podcasting as we go across old forgotten venues in the 90s.
People love to watch you think about that kind of stuff.
We played on the boat, Bally's Casino one time. I don't know if you remember that gig.
Right. Yeah. That's right. That same venue at Bally's, that was the time I was supposed to play. See if you remember this one with Freddie Hubbard. Remember they were gonna have
yes.
and Cats. And he had like the local rhythm section. I think it was like me and Adonis and
Cohosts was on one of those gigs.
Yeah. And Freddie, classic Freddie, like decided not to come, or like he said he was sick and he was going to come, and they got you to replace him. Remember? Didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we did the gig, and then remember we went over to the showcase where you already had another gig or somebody had a gig and we were going to sit in. And it turned out Freddie did come into town. And
he was there. He came to the gig. I thought you were. He was in town the whole time.
They came for our second gig.
But see, man, this brings home. You got to show up to the gigs.
That's right.
Freddie missed his gig. He showed up to our gig. It's more important. Yeah, it's more important to make the hang than it is to make your own gig.
That's right.
As long as it's a gig, doesn't mean that's
right. That's right.
Well, what as we're coming out of this thing, hopefully, what's new for you? What's next for you? What's coming up for you musically?
Sure. 2021 has been quite fruitful so far. I started it off with a new symphonic work commissioned by the Louisiana Philharmonic. It's called Gold Dust Black Magic. I actually just posted the first movement on my Instagram today. I'll be posting more movements in the next couple weeks. It's 26 minutes long, and it's basically a narrative about love, and each movement represents a different stage of romantic relationship. After that, I have been talking about well, for years I've been trying to work with Ron Carter, and we've played on various gigs. We did the Kansas City movie together with Robert Altman back in like 96.
Yeah.
We've played on a couple of Miles tributes. I made a James Williams album with him. But I've been really angling to try to work with Ron Carter for the past 20, 30 years. And he finally agreed to do one of my albums, but then COVID hit. So we were trying to wait for the right moment for it to be safe. So he was like, as soon as I get vaccinated, we can do it. So he got his stuff cool. He was like, I'm cool. After April 1st, I'm available. So we picked a date. Kareem Riggins is on drums, Ron is on bass, myself on keys and trumpet. And we also got George Coleman to guest on a couple tunes. So this was really like a dream band for me. Kareem has been a longtime friend and collaborator.
Yeah.
Ron, I grew up hearing, my father was friends with him. My father is a bassist, so my dad actually took lessons with him way back in the 70s, and they were good friends. So the album that really is chiefly responsible for me setting out on this path professionally was 4 and More by Miles Davis. And though I come up from a musical family in New Orleans, been around this music all my life, hearing that album at 11 years old was like me hearing the music for the first time. I'd already started doing some gigs. I was in James Andrews' band, who's Trombone Shorty's eldest brother. He had a brass band called the All-Star Brass Band, and we were based in Treme, which is the area right across the street from Armstrong Park in Congo Square. So I started doing some gigs with them and different people around town. So this is the first time me going to my father's record collection, because I had my own records. I was listening to rap and Michael Jackson and all that stuff. But I wanted to go to my father's albums and see like, well, let me pick out something. Because I heard things they played, but I never made the conscious choice to listen to it on my own volition. So like, Miles Davis is a name I recognize. 4 and More. Let me listen to this. And I put it on side 2 first. And from the moment I heard like that intro with Tony on the drums on the sock cymbal, though I had been around this music my whole life, I was like, I want to do this for real. and I wore that album out every day. So to have had two people on my album from that album is just such a full circle moment for me, and almost like a manifestation of me. Like when I was 11 years old, I would pretend I was in a band and pretend I would take Miles' solo and like pretend I was listening to George and Herbie and all those guys. And I really did that last week. So I'm still kind of riding high from being blessed by those cats to be on my album, which should come out on Smoke Records sometime this fall. So.
Awesome.
Man, Smoke Records has kind of been killing it lately with the music and the artwork and the LPs and stuff. I think that's some great stuff. How did you end up hooking up with them?
Well, Paul Stash, who's the proprietor, had been hitting me up for a while to work at the club. We started doing a couple gigs, and I kind of felt like I wanted to work in partnership with someone because, of course, I had my own label. But again, this music is ultimately a communal music. And I think most big moves require some type of partnership to happen, just like you guys have, you know. Like, sure, you can do things by yourself, but I think things are better when you work in conjunction with other people.
You hear that? You already saying? I knew there was going to be snark coming. I did not tell. See, Nick, great minds think alike. That's what I'm talking about. See.
So after me doing a couple gigs there, I was like, man, let's talk about doing something. So I did my first album for them at the end of 2019, Relaxing with Nick.
Yeah.
And so this next one coming up is called Smoke Sessions, and it's actually Smoke Sessions Records. So this will kind of be a flagship album of sorts for the label.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, we will look forward to that. And I know, Adam and I we have our own little relationship with Mr. Carter too. So we can talk about that another time, but
that was a great show, man. I enjoyed that.
No, it was fun. And I kind of, it's interesting you say about four and more, because for me, the record My Funny Valentine, which of course was from the same concert, and I don't know, I mean, I'm sure we probably talked about this. Well, actually, this is the great thing about doing this. I don't think of all the times we've hung out and stuff, we never really talk about music in this way. Not as much as folks probably think we do. But I never knew that about you, about that record. And it's so parallel, because for me, it was like when I heard that introduction, I mean, hearing the whole record, but I remember particularly the introduction that Herbie played on Stella by. I was like, man, I want to do that. I was like, I play piano, but I can't do that. So maybe it's within my realm. But I mean, it was just, and then for me, just getting, and everything. And it was as much Ron and George Coleman and Miles.
There was something in the air with that album.
Yeah.
Those two.
Yeah. And it was fun because I don't remember if it made it onto the podcast with Ron, but I asked him about that. I was trying to get him to go in more about the concert, and he went in a lot about Miles, but it was funny. Him and I've asked Herbie about that before. Because I always hear different things about how they were really upset and how Miles.
Exactly. Ron was talking about that at this session with the benefit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But
and basically Miles gave their money away to the cause, and Ron was like, "Well, you should ask us. Maybe we don't want to give our money to that cause."
Right. And you know how Ron is. Like he said it just like today. It was not like he was bashful or whatever. But I did ask him. That was kind of part of what we were asking him about. If I don't think I artfully asked the question. I was just so intimidated and just so happy to be there. So, but I wanted to know if he thought, because the thing with Miles, I think everybody's just like, oh yeah, Miles had all that planned out. Like he might not even given them away the money. He might have kept it, whatever. But like he timed it out that he told them that right before they're about to go on stage, so he could emotion. Yeah. But I kind of asked Ron about that, and he was sort of like, "What? No, he just gave our money away or whatever." But I always wonder how much it's like Miles, the calculating genius, and then or Miles just messing with them, or Miles getting lucky, or just hiring the right people. There's always that too.
I think there's a little bit of that. I don't know. I've actually heard Ron talk about the fact that oftentimes Miles will call "So What," and it'll be up there, and like Ron saying how like he never felt comfortable starting the gig because it was just always like we start like this off to the races.
Yeah.
I think there's knowing what I know about Miles, and I didn't know him personally really at all, met him once, but like there may be some bit of that Svengali type of, I'm going to create this dynamic by which, they're going to have to rise to the occasion. Just a little bit of conflict and angst to put that in your system before, and then like you create something out of it.
I love it, man. Yeah, Cat's getting too soft today.
That's right, exactly. That's all, you got to be in person to do that stuff, though. But I would just one more thing, and then we're gonna let you go, Nick. And I mean, appreciate your time, and I know folks.
I'm not ready to go. I just got here.
All right. No, but I was wondering about what you were saying about the different generations and the young cats now looking back to the '90s and the way we look back, like to Herbie and Ron and Wayne and that generation. But I wonder, it was so arresting for Adam and I think, to receive this call from Ron Carter's assistant, like, Mr. Carter would like to set up a Zoom call. And my first thing was like, Ron Carter's on Zoom? Even Ron has to be on Zoom? Poor guy, But I mean, it was just so, it was just like different worlds, it was like a collision. But then when we got in there and we were talking with it, because we had a whole conversation before we did the podcast, he just wanted to talk to us, and I was just like, man, this dude is truly bored, but he wants to and I mean, at first, of course, I thought he wanted to dispute what we said, because we did a whole episode about bass lines, and he would, the 7 greatest bass lines, and he happened to play as he would 2 of them, but it wasn't like a Ron Carter episode. But I was like, all right, we're about to be schooled. But I was like, that's cool. I mean, we're going to learn something. He won't learn anything, but we'll learn something at least. But then after talking to him, I realized it's like, he's such a, you would know way better having just recorded and worked with him. But, at age 83 or 84 now, I think, he is so engaged mentally and so together in this is so, him and Herbie too, like, it's almost like they are it's not about have they maintained. They may be at the very, very top of their game because they've got the mind, they've got the chops. And Ron was talking about how he practices 10 minutes more every day. I was like, dude, stop. Just stop at this point. You got it, But he wants to be engaged. He doesn't have to go record with you. He definitely doesn't have to sit on a Zoom with us, but he wants to be engaged. And so it's a precious thing that we're getting that from them.
It does. And really the scheduling, the biggest hiccup was him being committed to teaching his students 3 times a week. And he was like, we had like these 2-day windows by which we had to work between, because he was like, he's not canceling his lessons with his students because that's important to him. So to your point, like, he really actively wants to be engaged. And I'll tell you, like, he showed up to the session. I was a bit nervous because I heard stories about Ron, like, blasting cats in sessions, particularly piano players. So I was like, man, he's going to vibe the fuck out of me. Like, totally cool. Totally in service to the music. None of that shit I had heard about was present. To the contrary, he was just very humble and very much in service. Like, what do you want, Nicholas? Like, and just played his ass off, like, just crazy.
Yeah, but
then I got to do all my fake Herbie shit, man. I was just in there.
Were you like sneaking in if he let you? Yeah, but see, believe me, he vibes sad piano players. You just had me.
Well, I felt good, man. And George Coleman told me, man, Nicholas, I love your piano playing. And he said, I love your chord changes. For George Coleman, the king of chord substitution, to tell me that, I'm retiring. I'm announcing this on you'll hear it. I'm officially retired right now here in the studio. I'm good.
Oh, that's so awesome. So I know I just keep saying one more thing, but since you did say you had a thing,
hold on, before we move on, when does that album come out again? Can you say again?
In the fall sometime, maybe October.
Cool.
We don't have a set release date yet, but this fall.
Well, let's just keep rolling. You got anything to do, Adam? I mean, if you do, you can. I mean, as long as one of us here, let's do this.
I'm still on a panel.
Now, what did I say about camaraderie and partnership?
I know. Look, I'm like, if you're good. Well, I was just thinking of something because it was so fun this morning. I did a quick full disclosure. I did a quick deep dive. I got nervous all of a sudden at the last minute when you agreed to do this interview. I was like, man, this isn't gonna be like Ron Carter. I was like, I've known Nicholas for so long. It's just, but just, as I woke up this morning, panicked. I was like, wait, I gotta do a deep dive and really learn about Nicholas. I'm like on Wikipedia and stuff. But I was looking up just different videos And actually, some of my favorite videos of yours aren't even up on YouTube, like the Newport Jazz Festival. I think that's gotten taken down.
Thank
But
God.
no, man, no. But I would just recommend for folks, since you're talking about your piano playing, the Tiny Desk. I don't know how you feel about that performance, but I think that's such a great representation of your like keyboard concept in such a clear way. I mean, of course, you're playing trumpet and stuff too, but I love like just the way you play it. I'd highly recommend, unless you tell folks not to, and now they're really going to want to.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that show?
Well, there were a lot of challenges behind the scenes. So I feel it was cool, and I had a great band with me. Ben Williams and Jonathan Barber played beautifully. I had just come back from Europe. I was super jet lagged. I didn't feel like getting on a flight. So I had my manager's assistant drive me there. I had a gig that night with Kevin Eubanks at Birdland at the time. So I had to drive there during the day, do the Tiny Desk. The roads were super weird. I mean, it was like kind of like the second most fucked up roads I've ever played. And I only say the second worst because I can't remember the first.
That's saying something for a road.
It was really bad, man. And I was like, fuck. But, it came off. I feel cool about the performance, but there were definitely a lot of challenges. There's no monitors in that space.
Right.
So you have to hear and you have to play very quiet to get a balance. That's why you see like there's not a lot of full out drumming there. Like drummers are using those like fake brush things. I don't know what you call them. Like the smoke. Yeah, they're using those. When we did the ballad Othello, you see our drummer Jonathan Barber. He's playing with his hands. We were playing super soft. Now on the mic, it sounds present, but we were playing at a whispers. You can hear a rat pissing on cotton. That song. So it was challenging, but I think it was cool. And as you said, I think it's a cool representation of like the different stuff that I do. So yeah, I would say check it out for sure.
Cool. Well, good, because we already linked to it in the description to this. Not that we couldn't change that, Oh, that's cool. I'm just thinking of other like I mentioned before, Nick at Night. I think that's such a a great record, and I didn't even realize. Now it totally makes sense. You said that came out of the Time Machine thing, and that's not even why. I just think that I think that is one of the great groups or quintets that came along during that period of the 90s. And it's kind of convenient. It went, I know, beyond the 90s, but it's sort of convenient in that that's the decade that it's sort of ref. Reuben Rogers, Tim Warfield, Adonis Rose, Anthony Wanzi. But I know you were talking a couple of years ago about possibly bringing back that, or like kind of a reunion or a revival. What's happening? Is that still possible?
And also, I don't know if you remember, Pete, but you were actually the first person to play that music. We did a gig at Snug Harbor before I flew to New York to record. So I used that gig as a demo for Wanzi and Reuben and those guys to hear the music. We did a gig with Bryce, me, yourself. I forget who was on bass. Jason Stewart was on bass.
Jason Stewart, yeah.
And we played all that music at Snug Harbor before.
Cool. I remember playing the music. I didn't remember that was the, because that was like Back to Source and man, that's
after that. After that actually is like Beyond the Stars, all that stuff with through composed stuff. Right. But anyway, we were, the quintet was supposed to reunite, goddamn COVID, in 2020 at the Jazz Showcase, December.
Right.
Yeah. We're talking about trying to maybe do it this December into New Year's, but we don't know what the status will be with things opening up or not. But if all goes well, that'll happen this December at the Jazz Showcase in Chicago.
Oh, that'll be great. I mean, it's such a great venue, and just so folks know that Nicholas, some of you know because I've heard from you, a bunch of you on this, but Nicholas headed up an amazing tribute to Roy Hargrove that we did, an unofficial, or maybe it was official, I can't remember. It was a very spiritual and musical tribute to Roy Hargrove. It's very heartfelt. Just a couple months after his passing at the Showcase.
People are still talking about that one.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing. Yeah, it was amazing.
It was a great week. I felt like Roy was there. It felt like he was in the room.
Yes, absolutely. And Nicholas put together a group of musicians, all of which played with Roy. And I mean, we had played at different times with him during that week at in Chicago. You know, at the old showcase. So it was like that whole
his tradition there during that time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that was a really wonderful thing. So that was the last. So that was 2 years ago, and then last year was canceled. That's right. Wow, that's how time goes. So what's happening with the clubs in New Orleans now? Like, what is the level of stuff opening? People's
things are starting to open up. I had my first indoor gig 2 weekends ago at Tipitina's. My first indoor gig in the last year and a half. So yeah, that was cool. Things are opening up. Things are spread out. Tipitina's, which is normally standing room only, they're now seated, reservations ahead of time. Tables have to be so far spread and so forth. So things are opening depending on the type of venue and the setup. If it's outside or not, the regulations are different. But there's definitely music both indoors and outside right now, whereas for the longest it was only outside.
Right.
So
cool. Well, man, thank you so much, Nick. This has been like just really cool, and I know that folks are appreciative always to hear you talking about music and talking about these kind of things that are, you know, it's not just, hey, I've got a new record coming out and jazz is awesome. Jazz is awesome, dude. You know, and you know these things that are really, I think, over this past decade, as you alluded to, since you know you first. Actually, it's funny you talk about the tweets. You've always been ahead of the game with the social media thing. Because I'm just remembering you said about the tweets became the essay, became the blog. But before that, I remember I remember the email, the Nick Payton private email. That was like
before social media. Yeah.
Before, so like Nick had his own social network happening at him, but he was doing it via email because that was the only thing that you could do.
All you had, yeah.
But it was like a thing. If you got on the, you know, man, did you get the email? No, I want to see if I can get all this thing. Can you find? No, I don't. Because I remember people asking me. They're like, "Oh, you get his email?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Can you forward it?" And I was kind of like, "No." I was like, "Oh, I don't want to be that guy because then Nick will be like, 'Yo, you're not on the list anymore because." But it, you know, so I would just say, you know, on behalf of a lot of folks, man, keep on, you know, playing, of course, this and all you do, but keep on speaking and keep on, you know, helping all of us and leading because it's needed. And I love your optimistic tone coming out. That makes me feel great just hearing that because it confirms what I wanted to hear, but also because I know if it's coming from you, it's got some force and some will behind it. So much appreciated and much love to you always.
Love you.
Yeah, love you, man. And come on anytime. We're here every Monday. It's me and this guy. Hop in. And it's popping. We're going to get the sound happening next time, but this will be up on the podcast on Thursday for everybody with pristine audio. Wait, did you press record?
I did. And
okay.
We'll re-upload the YouTube conversation with the pristine audio as well, right after this.
You got to understand, Nick, we've been in here like this whole time. So you kind of see us? We're across from each other here.
Throw this right at you there.
Yeah, we have plexiglass, but we are COVID safe up in here. Wow. You know? It's like a sneeze guard, man, like at the Ponderosa. So thanks so much, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks, Adam. And until next time, you'll hear it.
Cool. Bam.